Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. I hope you are having a wonderful holiday season. Today is Jim's birthday. Happy birthday, Jim.
Hi, happy birthday. How are you?
No, it's happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you.
And we are running his book sale right now up on our bookstore. And I'll put the link right here, the address right here, so that you can go directly to the bookstore. 20% off today and tomorrow for all of our books. Today we're going to do something I hope is going to be really quick and easy. We're going to make fast tomato sauce. Now just how fast depends on a couple of things. You know, I usually like to practice everything before I do it in front of the camera. This is a time though when I think it is very instructive for you to see my process as I work through this, because you may have to go through the very same process. And if I just come in with a finished product, then it's not going to be as instructive. So we're going to kind of start from the beginning, and then we're sort of going to go backwards, and I'll explain that as we go. The recipe that I am using is out of this book. It is the all-new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving. Many of you have this book. I highly recommend this book. Along with the first book you should have is the USDA Home Canning Recommendations book. But this is probably the next one that I would recommend. And there are lots of fun and wonderful recipes in here. We're going to do the tomato sauce. Now, the tomato sauce recipe that we're going to use is very plain. If we do the plain side on, you can see with all my little sticky notes that I use this a lot. This is the plain recipe, but this is 4 ways to do it with different flavors. There is an Italian seasoning blend, a smoky Mexican seasoning blend, a curry seasoning blend, and a Creole seasoning blend. Now, it is really important, especially when we are working with tomatoes, that we do the recipe pretty exactly. Now, the thing that we can the thing that we can change just a little bit may be the seasonings, provided they are dried seasonings. We don't ever, when we're working with tomatoes, want to use fresh seasonings when we are doing a tested recipe, which we should always do, because fresh messes with the pH. These tested recipes have been tested very carefully with pH levels, and we will be acidifying. Now, there are 3 ways that we can tomato sauce. We can do it water bath canning, we can do it steam canning, which is what we're going to do today, or we can do it pressure canning. 3 ways. Now, not one of those methods is better than the other. They're all equally wonderful in terms of safety. I like steam canning because the jars come out so clean and it doesn't take quite as long. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, here's what our dilemma is. This recipe calls for 15 pounds of tomatoes. Not on your life will I process from scratch 15 pounds of tomatoes. Been there, done that, and not too long ago we did a video on shortcutting tomatoes using passata, Italian passata, or Italian puree. Now, I very much prefer either the Cento brand or the Contadina brand. Contadina, they use 100% Roma tomatoes right off the vine. Cento uses fresh tomatoes right off the vine. It is not made from dried or anything, a concentrate that has to be reconstituted. Just for the heck of it, I asked Jim the other day when he was at the store to just bring me home a house brand. It was like either Food Club or the Great Value brand. It was one of those because I just wanted to taste the difference. One of the huge differences is that the tomato puree in that can was made from pulp. What is tomato pulp? What goes into tomato pulp? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but that was the only ingredient. Now, this has only ingredient of tomatoes that are freshly processed. This has a little bit of citric acid in it, so these are acidified, which is always good. The pH on both of these is great. Now, I also the other day opened up a can of Contadina and made my tomato juice. from a can of Contadina, and it worked just great. The tomato juice that I made from the store brand was horrible. And so I prefer one of these or the other. Now, what I have not yet done is a taste test between these two right out of the can, and we're going to do that today. We're also going to look at the consistency. So what we want to do, because we're going to be working backwards, we want to end up with, if we do a full recipe, 3 quarts. Well, are we going to can it in quart jars or pint jars? The processing times are given for both those size jars. Now, in referring to healthycanning.com, which is one of the places that I go to all the time, and I trust them because they follow USDA really closely, they said we can also do it in these 8-ounce jars, but since the timing has not been stipulated for an 8-ounce jar, we will have to process these at the pint jar timing, which for our elevation is 35 minutes plus an extra 10 for the elevation, which is 45 minutes. So we will be steam canning over here these jars of tomato sauce for 45 minutes. Now, are we going to do just plain? No, we're not. I'm going to use the Italian recipe, and here is why. Because the plain recipe, listen to the ingredients. 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid, or 1/3 cup of bottled lemon juice, and 1 tablespoon of salt. What? And that's added to those 15 pounds of tomatoes that you have to slip the skins and then run them through a mill, or wash them and run them through a mill. Let's see what it says. Then bring them to a boil them down, and if they're going to be really, really juicy, run them through a mill to capture the skin and the seeds, and then you have to boil it down for 3 or 4 hours to get to the right consistency. I'm sorry, that's not a fast way to do tomato sauce, and when we can start with our passata or this puree made from these Italian tomatoes, then we're just that much ahead, hours ahead, actually. So here are my questions going into this. I wanted to know, first of all, what is the consistency of commercially canned tomato sauce? Because I want to mimic that with my sauce. So we're going to open this and put a little bit out on this plate. And I want to read you the ingredients to this regular tomato sauce. And it just says tomato sauce. It's not Mexican, it's not Italian, it's not anything. So the ingredients are tomatoes, sea salt, dehydrated onions, dehydrated garlic, spices, natural flavoring, sweet bell pepper, citric acid. So they have added onions, garlic, and sweet bell pepper to this recipe. Now, you might want to do that as well, but I'm going to tell you right now, do not do it unless you can find a tested recipe, because tomatoes sit right on the boundary between low acid and high acid foods. And what makes it possible for us to even can tomatoes at all is that regardless of what we're going to do with our canning, tomatoes need to be acidified. Water bath, steam, or pressure canning of tomatoes all require the same amount of acidification. But if you add things like onions and bell peppers to your tomato sauce, what that does is, because those are low acid, that raises the pH of the tomato mixture, the tomato sauce mixture, and it might raise it above the 4.6. And so if you can find a tested recipe from the Ball Book, from USDA, from one of the state extension offices that has been tested, that has those things in it, then fine. So what we're going to do is move forward right now and open this up. When I know it's been around once, then I can stop it. Okay, it did a pretty good job. Just one little spot. So this is the consistency of their tomato sauce. So that's about right. So I'm just going to put a tablespoon out here, and we're just going to let it sit. Now, For this one, I'm not going to open this one, but I am going to read you the ingredients so that you can see some of the things that we might add to make this. This is a Mexican tomato sauce. Tomato concentrate, there it is, it starts from concentrate. Water, tomato paste, water, salt, dried chilies, dried onion, natural flavors, dried garlic, citric acid, and spices. So this has started from concentrate rather than from fresh tomatoes. So we have the advantage of these cans, which are fresh tomatoes. Now let's take a look at, let's open the Cento. All right, so here we have the Cento. Now my big question is, are we going to need to cook it down at all or not? So does this look to you? And I rinsed off that spoon. Okay, so here is the consistency of this one. Here is the consistency of this one. So this one is thicker. And let's check because I'm going to be using both of these. And actually I'll be mixing them. And here's the consistency of this one.
It's a little thinner.
It is just slightly thinner. The way that I'm seeing this is that the Cento is a little bit of a larger texture. The contadina is a finer texture, very similar to the original tomato sauce, but much thicker. So let's put a dab of the Cento, of the contadina right there, and the Cento right there. Yeah, the contadina is just a bit darker. So also notice how watery this is. This is very common in tomatoes. There's an enzyme in tomatoes that causes the separation of the solids from the water unless you treat it right during the processing. And obviously these guys didn't. It looks like the Cento is bleeding just a little bit and the contadina is not. Now I actually want to taste each one. This is the tomato juice that I am drinking right now, made from this. They taste just a little bit different. I really like the contadina. The Cento is a little bit more mild because I think that they don't use 100% Roma tomatoes. I really like both of them. So whichever one we find on sale between these two is the one that we're going to get. I do need to taste the tomato sauce to see how it's going to compare to the other two. Oh. It has more flavor because of the other ingredients, but the first thing that comes to my mind is salt. It's very salty. So guess what? When we make our own using our passata or puree, we have control over that because all this is the tomato work already done for us. All right, so here is what our choice is. I don't think we need to cook this down at all. I think all we really need to do, if anything, we would add liquid, but I'm not going to add liquid because I think tomato sauce would be wonderful at this consistency instead of this consistency. I mean, we could thin it down. My personal preference is I'm going to go with this just the way it is. Absolutely, this would make beautiful sauce. So guess what? It's okay to use this sauce with just, if we want to, the addition of a little bit of salt. The only reason the lemon juice is required is if we can it. But if we don't plan to can it, use it right out of the can for tomato sauce with a little bit of salt added. Or if you are not going to can it, then to this you can add the onions and bell pepper and the garlic and all of the other fresh things that you want to. I would pulverize those first in a blender or a food processor, then add to this with some salt, and then cook it a little bit so that the flavors could blend. So this is the fastest tomato sauce ever. And then, as we mentioned in our last video on tomato juice on Micro Moment Monday, a week or so ago, then you can just have on your shelf this puree, this passata, and you can turn it into so many things. And so this is great. And the other thing we mentioned is that it freezes beautifully. So if your recipe calls for tomato sauce and you don't have a can on your shelf, well then open up one of your food storage passata or puree cans and use as much as you want for tomato sauce and freeze the rest. So that is great. But today we are going to make the Italian tomato sauce, and it's going to go very fast because all we have to do is heat it. Now we can take a look at our tomatoes. We can see that all of them are bleeding just a little bit. And it really doesn't make any difference. Once it's stirred into a recipe, it is just fine. It may separate in the jars as well. All right, so what I have right here is a 1 quart measure. I need 4 cups, and so I'm going to start with a contadina. I really preferred that flavor just a little bit for tomato sauce. So there is the contadina. And then I'm going to add enough of the cento to bring it up to 4 cups or a quart. And we have about this much left, which I'll just freeze. Or actually, I may just make that into tomato juice and keep a little backup in the refrigerator. And now we're going to dump this in here because even though we don't have to cook it down, what we do have to do is to get it super hot. Now, I'm going to add just a little bit of water to rinse this out and to perhaps thin it just a tiny bit. All right, now we're going to turn this on and stir it around, and we're going to add the spices to it. So I'm going to follow the Italian seasoning, and I'm cutting it in by 1/3 because the full recipe makes 3 quarts. I'm only making 1 quart. So I'm going to be putting in 2 teaspoons of dried oregano. 2 teaspoons of dried basil, because I want my spices to match the amount. 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. Half a teaspoon of thyme. And then the main recipe also calls for salt. And so by cutting that in 1/3, I have 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to make that a shy teaspoon. I don't want it as salty as that other one was. Now I'm going to stir this constantly until the whole thing comes to a boil. We're just going to get it hot, and that's all we're going to do. And then we will put it in the jars. The reason that I'm going to be canning in half-pint jars is that's the size that I use the most. And this is Italian flavored, and I use very little Italian flavored tomato sauce, but it's nice to have it on hand. Now we're going to be leaving 1/2 inch of headspace here according to the USDA. So if you use tomato sauce in quarts or pint when you are doing your cooking, then by all means use those sized jars. That's the beauty about canning. We can make it just exactly how we want. According to healthycanning.com, one of the best ways to acidify is to do it per jar rather than per big batch, just in case you come out with the odd number of jars not prescribed in the recipe, and then your acidification measurement will be off a little bit. So these required 1/8 of a teaspoon of citric acid. And so I'm just going to pour it in on the top. Normally I would put it on the bottom of the jar because you do it per jar. And then as I check for air bubbles, I'll just kind of stir it around. All right, so there's our acidification. And here is checking for air bubbles. And I could have done the same with lemon juice in the bottom. And I haven't tasted this, so I'm going to do that right now. Oh my gosh. Oh, is it ever good? It is not too salty at all, not nearly as salty as that other was. Okay, now I'm going to wipe the rims, and we'll get these in the canner. And this is just water dampening this towel. We don't need to do it with vinegar because there's no fat in this recipe, and the vinegar cuts fat. All right, I will put these in the canner, and once the steam comes back up and is putting out a really nice stream of steam, then we will start timing for 45 minutes, and we will come back after I have turned the heat off, let them sit in the pot for about 5 minutes, and then we'll take them out and take a look at them. So we will see you then. Last one. So here they are, and they are beautiful. I'm sure they'll start popping in just a minute, and we'll have all 4 of them ready to go out on our shelf. 4 may seem like a very small amount, but that's probably a year's supply for us in terms of the Italian tomato sauce. So it really is delicious, and I'm very happy to have it. And so that's the basics of making very fast tomato sauce. Either you don't have to heat it or cook it at all. You can use it right out of the can with just a little bit of salt. If you want to add other ingredients, knock yourself out so long as you don't can it. If you can it, don't add any other ingredients that is low acid unless you can find a tested recipe for doing so. And then be sure to acidify regardless of whether you're going to water bath or steam or pressure canning. So this idea of using our tomato shortcut that we have recently learned about by replacing the passata or the puree for those pounds and pounds and pounds of tomatoes that we would have to process by hand. What a time saver this is for us. And it enables us to just use the tomatoes right out of the can, or to mix up quick batches of things and even canning. Next up, we're going to do some tomato paste, and I'm not going to do it over the stove because we have to cook it down to make it very thick and viscous. So I'll show you what we're going to do instead. So thank you so much for being with us. Don't forget, Jim's birthday book sale is going on right now. And excuse us, but we're going to go celebrate Jim's birthday. So see you very soon for another video.